Estimated that there's more than 1 trillion cubic feet of so-called shale gas trapped within the rocks beneath northern England alone. But the method that would be used to extract that gas, fracking, is controversial. The first part of the operation involves drilling straight down and then turning the drill horizontally to run for miles underground. The ability to do this is improving all the time. The aim is to reach the tiny fissures in the shale rock below ground. These are minute. Some are less than 1 millimetre across. That's where molecules of gas are locked away, trapped inside. What's called slick water is then pumped in at high pressure. This forces the cracks in the rock to widen. Tiny grains, known as proppants, a bit like sand, are carried in by the water. They hold the fissures open. The technology of this keeps advancing. Once the rock has been broken up, gas is released and is then flushed all the way back up to the surface. And we're joined now from Westminster by the former chair of the Environment Agency and former Labour Cabinet Minister, Chris Smith. He's leading a new initiative to review the impact of shale gas exploration and production in the UK. And I'm joined here in the studio by the anti-fracking campaigner, Joe Corry. Welcome to both of you. Chris Smith, first of all, what's your inquiry about?
Well, we're going to try and get to the truth about shale gas, to find out exactly what the safety concerns are, how they can be mitigated, what sort of regulatory system there ought to be. There's a lot of public concern about aspects of fracking, of course, the environmental impact, the local impact, what it will contribute or not to overall climate change. We want to analyse each of these areas. We want to look at the existing evidence. We want to commission new research to be done where there are gaps, and we want to come up for the public with a genuine attempt to establish where the truth lies.
Under whose auspices are you carrying out this inquiry?
Well, we're doing it for the public. It's funded by the shale gas industry, but I insisted when they came to me and said, would I take this responsibility on? I insisted that we should be completely independent in what we decide to have a look at, how we go about doing it, and what we say. And that's written into the constitution of the task force. They cannot have any influence on it. And that's why I want it to be an absolutely genuine attempt to establish, for the benefit of the public, where the truth lies.
Right, and obviously you're putting your intentions very clearly, but there will be people, unsurprisingly, who will say, but you're being funded by those companies. How can you be independent? They will have some influence. They're paying for it.
And I will point to the constitution of the task force, which gives it absolutely cast iron independence. And indeed, what I've already said is that I'm asking for evidence from the widest possible range of sources, whether it's from environmental organisations, from talk fracking, from academics, from the industry. I want to get the evidence from the widest possible range of places so that we can have a proper look at it.
You're in favour, though, aren't you, generally?
What I've said up to now is that I think shale gas could provide a useful component to Britain's energy requirements of the future, but only if, and it's a very big if, only if it's done properly and the regulation is fiercely in place.
Right. And you say that you've got obviously you're thinking about the public and your intention is to be fiercely independent. What if all the evidence, let's just say, comes back and says fracking is a bad idea environmentally, it won't actually guarantee an extra stream of energy source? Will you be prepared to print that, despite the fact that your backers are Centrica, Quadrilla, Dow, Total, the Weir Group, and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. If that's what the evidence points to, it's the evidence that should be king here. If that's what the evidence points to, then that's what we'll say. At the moment, of course, the debate is polarised. There's one lot of people who say that this is the answer to Britain's energy requirements for the next 50 years. There's another lot of people who say this is an environmental disaster. I suspect that we will find the evidence points to the truth lying somewhere in between. And I want to find out exactly where that is so that the public can properly make up their minds.
Another member of the task force is Conservative peer Patience Wheatcroft. Is she independent?
She is indeed. She's, as far as I'm aware, said nothing thus far about shale gas. She comes to it with a completely open mind. Hers is an acute and intelligent mind, a lifetime, of course, in the media industry. And she will, I think, think, be bringing a very sharp mind and judgment to the sort of issues that we're going to have a look at.
And what about Professor Ernest Rutter, a geologist at the University of Manchester, who has said there are good scientific reasons to believe there is sufficient shale gas in the UK to have a major impact on fuel supply? Is he independent?
He is one of the most eminent geologists we have in this country. He's taken a very reasoned approach to this issue thus far. Of course, he's said a number of things over the course of time, as he would, because it's his job. But what he has given a very firm commitment to with the task force is to approach it from an impartial point of view and to examine the evidence. It's the evidence that's going to be the key to this, not polemic on either side of the argument.
Chris Smith, stay with us. We're going to talk to Joe Corrie now, who's been listening to everything that you've been saying. First of all, do you think it's worthwhile having an inquiry?
I think it is, but I mean, this is a bit sort of cart before the horse, really. I mean, the government's already pushing through legislation as we speak, which will allow these companies to drill 300 metres under people's homes and leave whatever toxic materials they want to down there. I mean, surely, first of all, you should be having an independent report before you put through legislation like that, not after it. And how can you possibly have a report such as this, or a task force such as this, with any credibility whatsoever when it's funded by the industry?
Well, you've heard...
And Chris Smith himself, I mean, I don't know whether he's on a fool's errand or a hide into nowhere, but I mean, you know, he's already been very vociferous, and in fact in his role as the chairman for the Environment Agency has done as much as he can to try and smooth the way through for people like Quadrilla in terms of their waste management and stuff. And even though they have an abysmal track record with regard to regulations. I mean, so
you don't trust, you're not going to trust anything that comes out of this?
I don't think anybody's going to trust it. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's a joke.
Even if, as Chris Smith says, that he's going to look at the evidence, it will be evidence-based.
You cannot have somebody that's already demonstratively pro-fracking from a government that was pro-fracking, and funded by an industry that is pro-fracking, to somehow give an impartial, independent report. It just doesn't make any sense.
This isn't government, obviously, as you know, but it's
because the government is in such shambles with regard to its fracking policy. They're now looking to industry to try and sort out their problem.
So I come back to but if this inquiry is going to look at the evidence and requirements that would be needed to make fracking safe, are you interested in the results? Are you interested in seeing at least what is uncovered, even if you are, as you've stated very clearly, very cynical about it?
Well, of course. I mean, it all sounds good, doesn't it? But in reality, what this is yet another PR exercise from the fracking industry to try to hoodwink the public, who are not being hoodwinked. Listen, you know, the majority of this country do not want fracking. Nobody voted for it. The government has no democratic mandate to be putting this thing
What
through.
Are you basing that on? The majority of the public don't... What are you basing the majority of the public don't want fracking?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at the consultation that's going through government at the moment with regard to the infrastructure bill, 99% of the people that responded to that responded that they didn't want it. They thought it was a bad idea. We've just done a YouGov survey ourselves with regard to 18 to 24-year-olds. The majority of them don't want fracking.
All right, well,
This is a political hot potato. The government doesn't know what they're doing. The whole idea of fracking economically doesn't make any sense, and they won't even know if it makes any sense for the next 15
Well, you could
to 20
arguably
years.
say if it is a stream of energy source, that it could make a big difference economically. Maybe not as big, of course, as in the States. What's your view? Are you interested in finding out if fracking is a viable option, Jackie?
Well, not least because of some of the things that we discussed earlier in terms of energy security. Pragmatically, I think if there is a potential of an energy source here, it's worthwhile looking into. But it needs to have, I think, probably much tougher environmental regulation around it than it's got at the moment. And it would be good, and I hope that Chris can do it, but certainly I hope others can if he can't, to have a bit more information, a bit more objective scientific background to enable people to make a judgment. It's a bit like genetically modified food, where people took very trenchant positions, but actually it needed a bit more consideration in order for people to really
Would
make
you
a
trust
judgment
the
call.
evidence, very briefly, would you trust the evidence then from this committee, despite the fact that it's backed by the industry?
I would trust Chris. I mean, I think he's, you know, he's got nothing to gain, to be honest with you, by not being independent.
Well, he's going to earn £1,500 a day himself for doing this job. I mean, he's got vested interest in it.
You can impugn his interest if you want to, but I think he's a pretty independent-minded person.
Just before you go, you better respond to that by Joe Corrie saying that you're going to be earning money out of this, or do you have an axe to grind at all?
I don't have an axe to grind. We're not part of the government. This is not a PR exercise. We are absolutely keen to get hold of the evidence, to make an assessment of it, and to put everything into the public domain. We will be completely open about the evidence that we receive and the conclusions that we draw from it.
All right.
Because I think the more information the public can have on this very controversial subject, the better.
All right, Chris Smith, Joe Corrie, thank you both very much.